Forward Base Sawano at Xeno Island by Tactical Cat. Episode 5. Lieutenant Commander Mikasa Mika of s-AVE. Bleep, bleep, pealed the notice bell above the sickbay entrance. What, another bar fight this time? Lieutenant Commander Mikasa sighed, stacking a heap of research papers into a folder and straightening the lapels of her white lab coat. Like Lieutenant Angela, she had been given instructions by the Admiral at the last staff meeting. Keep up the research on the laser-damaged tissue samples. That's going to be invaluable in the near future. For the rest, keep an eye on the stress levels you're seeing and tolerate cleaning up bar fights a while longer. She had replied with a disappointed sigh, but based on how he had emphasized her tissue research, it seemed like he was expecting something important to happen. She had not expected to have to recruit that knowledge so soon, however. Slid the door. Mika peered between dark, overhanging bangs into the entryway, gathered one good look, and called for some extra staff. He took a few shots to the upper abdomen, explained Yuki, leaning awkwardly to the side under Dholnur, who had limped the way back on her shoulder. In his free hand, he grasped the shield core, but his arm looked like it was about to fall off. Before closing the door, Mika glanced down the hallway. There was a thin trail of blood scattered across the floor. Based on how rounded the drops were, they must have not been in such a hurry to get here. Still, something didn't add up. There wasn't enough blood from multiple bullet wounds, especially from someone Captain Dholnur's size. Mika took over from there, dragging him into the ICU. Careful with his arm, warned Yuki, with a hint of concern. I might have missed something. Yuki watched the tails of Mika's coat trailing just over the floor. She had always been taller than Mika, as the older one. Except for this, they looked rather similar, both with dark hair and spotlights of curiosity for eyes. It had been a while since they had seen each other. Mika seemed to have grown a little taller, and, as far as Yuki could discern from their brief but patient interaction, Mika had beaten her to figuring out what the Admiral's recommendation to loosen up meant. Yuki watched Mika and Dholnur disappear behind the doorway to the ICU. Just before they entered, Dholnur's strength at last gave way, and he dropped its shield. Stoic like its bearer, gravityWall made a wonderfully quiet ring as it impacted the floor. After a shaken exhale, Yuki's emotions began to settle back in place. Her job was over. The adrenaline finally released her body. There was nothing else to execute. It was over. She stared at gravityWall over there on the floor. One boot followed another in knife-like precision as she walked over to the shield and lifted it in both hands. The brilliant metal ring around the core gave off a soft vibration as her fingers contacted it. The chime was irresistibly gleeful, as if to call out and say, "Don't worry, I protected him." Gazing into the soft purple crystal embedded in the center, she wondered if she would have been alive without this little guy in the hands of someone like Captain Dholnur. gravityWall continued chiming into her mind. I still don't know how to escape from this beautiful trap, but whatever they say, I'll never stop believing in myself. She smirked. It really was the perfect companion of Captain Dholnur, like a manifestation of his soul. She took his soul shard over to the corner of the room beside the door, clasped her hands behind her back, and waited patiently at attention. Suddenly, in stomped Lieutenant Commander Mika, the fiercest gaze smoldering behind her dark eyes. She glanced upward at Yuki, who finally noticed the bright red scrub she had on beneath the lab coat. That wasn't standard dress. Was there a surgery scheduled recently? Or rather, give me the details, Mika insisted, in a small and nasal voice, almost as if it was constricted when she spoke. It gave it an earthly rhythm, as her sentences rose and fell like water over a rock cliff. Hearing Mika talk an octave above her own voice always made Yuki self-conscious. but she actually really enjoyed listening to her. Yuki summarized the recent proceedings. They had gone to inspect the state of the ship and collect personnel items. She had been intercepted on the way out, and after a brief skirmish, Dholnur had saved her life. They had retreated under the cover of gravityWall until it ran out of battery and shattered in the onslaught of lasers. Then Dholnur had thrown some shrapnel haphazardly in the enemy direction before collapsing silently on the staircase from exhaustion and not a few laser wounds. The account was quite succinct, so it wasn't too hard to determine the next course of action. "Uh-huh," nodded Mika through the report. "Sounds good." "Okay, got it." Yuki paused in her account, noticing Mika's fiery glare and the pursed lips. What's the issue?" she offered to Mika uncomfortably. "Is there something I didn't notice?" Mika made no response, but instead seized Yuki's arm and dragged her toward the ICU. "Take off your coat," Mika commanded, gesturing her to sit down on a bay bed. "You can keep crystallized since I know you captains live off ionic chimes, but the belt comes off too. And the boots. I'm inspecting and you're not getting out of this." Stunned or terrified into silence, Yuki didn't move. Seeing this, Mika placed both her arms on Yuki's shoulders and gently pushed her down. Then she slid off the sleeve of her coat. "Wait," Yuki protested. "I need to report to Admiral now." "Were you aware," Mika interjected amusedly, glancing over Yuki's back to see what was keeping the other sleeve in place, "that there's a knife sticking out of your shoulder?" "Huh?" Yuki hesitated. She had been working on pure adrenaline. Dholnur, too. That's why they had made it back in more or less human shape. She had completely forgotten about the knife. Now that Mika brought it up again, the endorphins were wearing off. Oh. Mika wasn't wrong. There was a knife sitting happily in her shoulder. "Right, I left it there intentionally so it wouldn't bleed out. It's just superficial." Mika shook her head and scoffed. "Superficial, eh? This isn't the first time I've heard something ridiculous like this from you. When I went through medical training, the basic assumption was that the average human has a sense of pain and self-preservation." Mika enjoyed harvesting a suppressed range of embarrassed emotions from Yuki's face. "But," she declared defiantly, "I suppose, if you don't want me to fix it, I can leave it there for you until you report to the Admiral and get back." She had to be careful with this sort of teasing around the captains, however. Yuki might actually take her up on that suggestion. "Were you really just going to stand in the corner all day like this? Doesn't hurt me either way." "Actually," Yuki qualified, But Mika didn't let her finish. "That blood trail in the hall isn't from Captain Dholnur, is it?" She pointed nonchalantly toward the door with a thumb, as if presenting Yuki with mounting case evidence. "See," Mika explained clearly. "Long-duration, high-intensity heat causes a lot of internal issues, not the least of which is a risk of infection. But it also curdles blood. Violently." There was a curious smirk at the side of her lips. "And that means no bleeding." And now she delivered the bombshell conclusion. "Captain Dholnur has a few injuries, all right, but he isn't leaking over the floor like you are." She didn't mention that lasers also evaporated the water content in human tissue. The damage to Captain Dholnur was far worse than could be assessed externally, but her judgment told her that Yuki didn't need to know that. "And since you left this knife in your back..." Mika removed the knife with considerable impertinence. Upon further consideration, Yuki felt comfortable admitting the knife wounds actually hurt. She took a moment to recover from the shock of the extraction. "Now," continued Mika, placing the bloodied knife aside onto a metal tray. She unclasped Yuki's belt, and all of a sudden, a stuffy metallic smell of warm blood infused the air. So, this was the source of all the blood in the hallway. "I get it," thought Mika. Ingenious. "Well, that's gonna need a washing," she joked, watching Yuki's shirt pool with blood I think you left out the part where they had swords, and you took a hit to the abdomen and bled all over the place." There was a certain indiscernible intensity behind Mika's joking. "You know, tying your belt over like this probably saved your life. That wasn't a bad idea." She was really trying to distract Yuki from how serious the issue was by delivering a bunch of sarcastic jokes. It was a coping mechanism her NCOs had developed for when the bar fight season started. "Well, let's have some fun, shall we?" She stole Yuki's hair tie and slid off her uniform coat amid much protesting. The sickening stench of iron was nostalgic.